Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we have a book with a wonderful title, I think. The title is Zen and Now. Zen and Now. It's almost like a mantra, you know? And the subtitle is On the Trail of Robert Pirsig and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. The author is Mark Richardson, all the way from Toronto, Canada. His publisher is Alfred A. Knopf. Thank you for stopping by.
It's my pleasure to be here.
And I really appreciate the fact that you agreed to come over here in a car and not your motorbike.
It's the first time I've been in a car in a couple of weeks, I think.
The story behind this book is really interesting. There is a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. And it is one of the most widely read philosophy books ever published, which is what the publisher says, and I think they're right.
Well, it's probably the most widely read.
Yeah. 5 million copies in print in 27 languages.
Yeah.
You have a ways to go, fella.
I know. It takes a bit of catching up to that one.
And it still sells about 50,000 copies a year.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, 2008, is the 40th anniversary of the original journey.
That's right. They did the trip that it was all based upon. It was a motorcycle ride from Minneapolis to San Francisco, stopping off for a few days in Bozeman, Montana. Mm-hmm. And they did the trip in 1968. And the book was then published. It took them a while to write it. It was published in 1974.
It's like 4 years, I think. No, more than that. 6 years.
So, from the time of actually sitting down to write the book and then finishing the book, it was around about 4 years.
4 years.
And then there was, actually no, it would be 4 years to the time when it was purchased. And then he had to edit it all down from 200,000 words, and it took about another year to make print after that.
Now, what you are, I mean, you fancy yourself an author, but I know what you are because it's right in the book. You are a Pirsig pilgrim.
Yeah, I didn't actually realize that until I think I knew that just before I set off on this trip. But I originally did this ride just because I was looking for a nice road trip. I had read the book a few times. Well, I'd started to read the book a few times and sort of got a little deeper into it each time. And then I finally finished the book when I was 41 years old. That's right, 41, on my birthday. I finished reading the book, and I thought, that's a fabulous road trip. I'd like to do that trip. Maybe it ends in San Francisco. Maybe 1 year from today, on my 42nd birthday, I should be in San Francisco at the end of this road trip. So then I started to research it and try and figure out what the actual route is, because when you read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, sometimes it's very clear where the author is.
Yes.
And sometimes it's very vague. He just describes, we stayed at a motel that had some cottonwood trees on the, you don't know where it is.
And the wildflowers were in bloom, and it was beautiful.
Well, it's very evocative, the whole descriptions of everything. That was the original appeal to me of the book. But I decided I had to get to San Francisco for my 42nd birthday. I started to research it, and I found there were other people who had done this trip before me who could give me some advice, and they're called Pirsig Pilgrims.
Now, you're different from, I think, I can safely say, most of the Pirsig Pilgrims, in that you didn't take this trip on a new bike. You resurrected a Suzuki dirt bike. What vintage?
Well, I didn't so much resurrect her for this trip. I had resurrected her anyway.
Oh.
This was my old dirt bike. She's 1985, Suzuki DR600. I got, in 1985, I bought a brand new dirt bike, Suzuki DR600, single cylinder, air-cooled, kickstart, only one dial and a few little lights that don't mean very much. And I wanted a really simple bike that I could maintain myself.
But you updated it in one way. Well, I had a GPS.
Yes, that's true. And I figured the GPS was the GPS was $600, and I figured the dirt bike was $500. That GPS actually saved me at one point, because on the way back, the speedometer busted on me, and I had no way of knowing where I was or what speed or whatever. and I lashed down the GPS over the speedometer with duct tape and used it.
I'm curious about one thing. There are a lot of those pilgrims out there. Are you the only one that's gotten published?
Yeah, I think so. I don't understand why.
Well, you're a good writer. That's all. That's all there is to it. Why is it good when you're riding down a road to hear clickety-clack, clickety-clack?
Because then you're a part of that road. You're not just watching the road through your windshield, as Pirsig wrote himself.
One of the great discoveries of Zen and Now is that many of the folks that Robert Pirsig met on his trip are still on the trail. And that's fascinating.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Zen and Now, on the trail of Robert Pirsig and the art of motorcycle maintenance. Mark Richardson is the author. Alfred A. Knopf is the publisher. And I don't have any reviews to share with you, as I like to do at the beginning of a segment. However, Mr. Richardson, in his benevolence and charity and good feelings towards Conversations on the Coast, would now like to quote for us from Quill and Quire. Mr. Richardson.
Well, I can almost quote because I don't have it in front of me.
Well, for our purposes, it's a
but
quote.
I've got it pretty much memorized because I love this review so much.
Okay.
And there was George Featherling, who's a poet from Vancouver, who reviewed my book. And he started it out. The lead of his review said, "With all due respect to the automotive section of the Toronto Star, who would ever have thought that its editor could craft a book so finely written as Zen and Now?" I thought that was fabulous. I sent that to the Star and to the other guys there that work with me in the automotive section, just to rub it in.
Well, I think that it's not so much against you as it's against your paper.
Well, you see, the automotive section is known as somewhere where all you do is read a bunch of, car reviews and the like, and we like to do a little bit more than
Clickety-clack.
that. Oh, that's true. Yeah.
One of the people that you met that Pirsig also spent time with is a gentleman, his name is Mike. I never caught his last name. The proprietor of the Prairie Motel in Lenin, South Dakota, an Israeli. Tell us about him.
Well, Pirsig did not meet him.
Oh, he didn't? I'm sorry.
No, he's sort of a new character. Some of the characters that are in my book were originals that Robert Pirsig had met along the way. People like Bill the Mechanic, Jenny DeWeese, who he stayed with in Montana. Mm-hmm. And then there are other people who I kind of found for myself along the way. And I think they're what helps to make my book special, and part of the reason why I enjoyed writing it and enjoyed the trip. And Mike is a Russian Israeli Jew who came to live in the States, originally in Indianapolis. He got a scholarship to the university there because he had been in the war and he had been blown out of his tank in Palestine, and he had basically put himself into seclusion. All his comrades, his friends in the tank were killed. He lay there with a broken back outside the thing, watching them die. And he came to the States. One thing led to another, and he ended up working for Cantor Fitzgerald as a sort of a Russian specialist because he spoke Russian. And as he put it to me, he happened to be on vacation the day the plane flew into his building, and all his colleagues died.
That's amazing.
And
which increased his guilt burden
completely.
Yeah.
And you know what? He had loved New York, and then he despised anywhere with tall buildings. He just didn't want anything to do with tall buildings, so he moved to the flattest place he could find, which was Lemon, South Dakota. He bought a motel. He bought it on the internet, and he moved there with his new Russian wife and her daughter. And I spoke to him about his whole experience, and it's in my book. I actually went to see him about a month or so ago. Mm-hmm. He'd been diagnosed with cancer, and when I spoke to him on the phone, he didn't have very long to live. So I got on my motorbike, and I rode to Chicago, which was, it was like 500 miles. I rode there with a copy of the galley of my book because I wanted to make sure he could read it before he died. He had already read his chapter. So I wanted to make sure there was nothing that I had gotten wrong in his chapter.
Yes.
But I took him the galley so he could read the whole book in its context. And actually, I'm kind of pleased to say this, but when I got there, I found that he was feeling a lot better and was well on the mend and was going to get back to work.
Oh.
But not as a motel owner. He's now driving a truck based out of Chicago.
Driving a truck out of Chicago.
Yeah.
Interesting man.
Fascinating
Bill
guy.
Bill Bergerson, though, he's one that you both met, is he not?
Bill Bergeron, that's right.
Bergeron, yeah. He's in Miles County, Montana.
Miles City, Montana. He was a guy that Pirsig met very, very briefly. He went into his bike shop to buy some foot peg rubbers at the time, and he talked to him about his carburetors. And the thing is that Bill Bergeron was the kind of guy who knew about quality and what makes for a good motorcycle as opposed to just, any old thing.
And quality, of course, is one of the major aspects of Pirsig's philosophy.
Quality is the aspect of Pirsig's philosophy, I believe. When he met with Bill, it was a brief encounter. When I met with Bill, I found that Bill had a fascinating story of basically vindication over life. Bill beat every odds against him so many times. He now has Parkinson's disease so badly he can't read my book. But even that he's beaten, and he's looking forward to listening to it on CD.
Oh, I hope so. I hope
So
he
do
gets
I.
that soon.
He will.
He had a great phrase when he got into a controversy. He would tell his opponents, "Go ahead and sharpen your pencils."
Yeah.
Zen and Now touches all aspects of Robert Pirsig's life: the fame, the happiness, the sadness, and the tragedy. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. Zen and Now on the Trail of Robert Pirsig and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is the book, and our guest is Mark Richardson. And one of the things is that you, as you said, continued in your relationship, if you will, with Mr. Bergerson longer than Pirsig did. And I find in that section what I feel is one of the most romantic passages in the book. You're on top of this motorbike, and there's not a lot of romance. You're always worried about getting run off the road and storms. Well,
it happens, right?
Well, I know. It's very realistic.
I can't help it.
But here you are out at Bergerson's place. And one of the things that Bergerson's place has is an airstrip. And he has an airstrip because he wanted something from the regular airport and they wouldn't give it to him. So he sharpened his pencil and built his own.
Yeah.
And he has people who have planes berthed or hangared at this airstrip. And he has Parkinson's and he can't ride a motorbike anymore. But he has a trike out in the garage, and he suggests that you take a run on it. And you
That's
do.
right. He'd only just gotten this trike. It was given to him for Father's Day by his family, and his son-in-law had built the thing for him. And he had been presented with it, but he was unable to go anywhere other than just around his house because it wasn't yet licensed. But when I got there, his license plate, which was Bill 45, had just turned up that day.
Wow.
He couldn't even put the license plate on himself. Bonnie, his wife, was going to do so. But I said, look, let me do something here. So I screwed on the license plate. And he said, hey, you want to go for a ride on the trike? And I did, and it was wonderful.
Describe what it was like.
Well, I'll read from the book, if I may.
Thank you.
And I say, and with a twist of the throttle on this old Harley-Davidson, restored by his son-in-law and presented with pride by his children, I head off down the gravel. Bill's watching from behind, and I'm acutely conscious of being careful, but it's hard not to relax as the speed builds and the trike drops into second and even into third gear as the runway blurs past. The road approaches too soon, and I slow down to turn around, looking up to see Bill standing there in front of the garage, watching me as Bonnie has been watching him. I ride back toward the house, and the speed builds again, and somewhere halfway, at around 40 miles an hour, I feel sure that if I lifted back on the handlebars, the trike would rise, leaving the gravel and heading up through the few wisps of cloud, breaking free from the ground and all that holds to it. There's no gravity, and I can fly, free of limits, free of pain, free of everything, free to be just me. It's going to get better now. And I look ahead and see Bill watching, and I know he knows this feeling and longs for it and craves it and refuses to ever let it go. And I know that he never, ever will.
It's a moment of romance and mythology, and it's very moving, and it's a wonderful thing, a wonderful experience to have had in the presence of such a fighter.
It was a fabulous thing.
Yeah.
Did you notice in that reading, there was one of my little gems in there. I call them my little gems. There's maybe a dozen in the whole book, in which I just take an expression or a word from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and I use it. And in this case, I say, it's going to get better now. And that, of course, is the end of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yes.
It's going to get better now. You can sort of tell these things.
One of the things that didn't get better, and of course wasn't covered in the original book, but you cover it here, is the death of his son, Chris, which took place right here in San Francisco. And any, murder on the streets of a city is tragic. But in his case, after a life struggling with mental illness, in and out of psychiatric wards and asylums and stuff, and he's here, he's putting it back together at our Zen Center, and what happens?
Well, it was all finally coming back together for him. He was getting his life in order, and it was 2 weeks before his 23rd birthday. He literally had been at the Zen Center, and he walked outside the door and was accosted on the street by a couple of guys who, it's believed, tried to rob him. He didn't resist. He didn't do anything. He just sort of mumbled at them, and they got frustrated, and one of them stabbed a bread knife into his heart, and he walked about a block down the road looking for help and collapsed and died under a street lamp.
That is so sad, because a lot of Pirsig's life was not happy. I mean,
No.
he did not wear his fame well.
He did not, no.
You know?
And he still is not sure how best to wear his fame, which is why he is so reclusive. He lives in New England. He doesn't really like to talk to anybody or have anything to do with people anymore.
And he's had no ensuing publishing success either, which...
Well, no, that
always
Lila was published in 91. It was successful, but in a much smaller way than his previous book.
Well, here's a book that ought to be successful in a big way. Zen and Now, on the Trail of Robert Pirsig and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's by Mark Richardson. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.